Today I'll be telling you about what's new with Psychtoolbox, particularly in the past 2 years since our last presentation at VSS in 2022. Mario Kleiner, the developer of Psychtoolbox, will be available afterwards to answer your questions. To give an overview of what Psychtoolbox is, it's an open source toolbox for flexible experiment design with the most reliable timing and most advanced features available. It's optimally used with the open source Linux operating system, and that's because its development goes beyond the toolbox. Mario also optimizes Linux itself to give the best possible timing that's only possible if you can have control over the operating system itself. This unfortunately isn't possible with Windows and macOS, but Mario also does everything he can to find workarounds to give the best possible timing on these systems as well. Psychtoolbox is a MATLAB toolbox, but it also works well on GNU Octave as a free MATLAB alternative for many common use cases. Psychtoolbox has a really large community. It's cited by over 37,000 articles as of May 2024. There are also many toolboxes that build on top of Psychtoolbox, an example of which is Psychbench, from which you're going to hear a talk later in the session. Psychtoolbox core routines for response collection and sound are even instrumental for Python-based toolkits like PsychoPy3. So it's really very widely used, and there's a lot of people building research and other toolboxes on top of Psychtoolbox. I want to go through several of the notable new features that have been added in the past couple of years, the biggest of which is the new OpenXR extended reality driver. This gives improved virtual reality support via industry-standard multi-vendor OpenXR API. This means you can use it on most available head-mounted displays on Linux and Windows, and you can also use many VR-tracked input controllers. There's also high extensibility for future enhancements, for example in the domains of mixed reality and augmented reality, where you might want to mix aspects of your real visual scene with virtual components. Even more for VR, is initial eye tracking support for OpenXR. Many HMDs are now coming with an eye tracker integrated so that you can know exactly what your subject is looking at in the virtual scene. You get a basic monocular or cyclops eye, which combines gaze tracking into one vector for the two eyes under Linux and Windows via any VR HMD or eye tracker supported by OpenXR runtimes. There's also binocular eye tracking under Windows with supported HTC VR HMDs, and both of these have been tested so far with the HTC Vive Pro Eye on Windows 10. Even more for eye tracking is a massive update of the iLink toolbox. This is for SR Research iLink gaze trackers on Linux, Windows and macOS. Some of the improvements are gaze tracking for stereoscopic display setups. These are where you have separate images for each eye. Use of animated stimuli and movies for gaze tracker calibration. There's also many improvements, for example, audio feedback and other things that just make your experiments easier to run. There's also new demos showing optimal use of the new iLink toolbox. This was mostly contributed by the team at SR Research, and thank you very much to them, with feedback and improvements by Mario to ensure backwards compatibility, so your legacy code should continue to work, and to optimally integrate with Psychtoolbox. Another new feature is improvement to display mirroring. These are for setups with a stimulus display for the subject and a monitoring display, where you might want very precise visual stimuli and timing for your stimulus display, but just want to monitor. For example, if you imagine a setup with an MRI scanner, as the experimenter, you can't see your stimulus display because it's in the MRI scanner, but you might want to be able to check what's being shown, but you don't need precise visual timing on your monitoring display, and you don't want to impair visual timing on your stimulus display. So there's an improved ability now to use these kind of mirror modes without impairing visual stimulus timing. And Psychtoolbox is the only toolkit that can do this in many cases without special hardware or impairing visual stimulation. There's also improved movie playback performance. This has improved performance for demanding videos, for example, for K resolution, HDR movies, via more efficient use of hardware video decoding. This allows, for example, for parallel playback of multiple 4K HDR movies at 60 frames per second on suitable graphics cards under Linux and Windows. Another new feature is a new method of downloading Psychtoolbox. This was unfortunately necessary because GitHub removed subversion support at the beginning of this year, and this disabled our installer, updater, and versioning. A workaround was contributed by the MathWorks open source team, so thank you to them for that. This gives a new automated workflow generating a downloadable zip file of the Psychtoolbox folder, and also options for installation via MATLAB's built-in add-on package browser. There still needs to be a manual run of setup Psychtoolbox and installation of dependencies like GStreamer. I now want to change direction to talk about the Psychtoolbox team and funding situation. Psychtoolbox is developed and maintained by a very small team, the key person of which is Mario Kleiner, the Psychtoolbox developer, who basically does 99% of all the work related to Psychtoolbox. That's software development, maintenance, documentation, user support, and contributing to relevant third-party projects and Linux improvements. He does that while working more than full-time on a part-time position due to the financial situation. There's also the CEO of our host company, Ingo Hemmerle, who dedicates about 1.5 hours a month to Psychtoolbox business-related aspects, such as contract sales licenses. There's also some unpaid volunteers, such as myself, Diedrich Niehorster, Ian Anderlina, that are involved in community engagement, and Peter Scarf is involved in developing tutorials and demos showing use of Psychtoolbox. Another way to think about it is illustrated by this XKCD cartoon that you may know, which shows all of modern digital infrastructure being held up by a project some random person in Nebraska has been thanklessly maintaining since 2003. In the case of Psychtoolbox, this is your research project on top of Psychtoolbox, which is being held up solely pretty much by Mario. Psychtoolbox requires regular maintenance and development to ensure compatibility for new operating system versions, and that's for Linux, Windows, and macOS, for new MATLAB and Octave versions, for new hardware and technology, and for new requirements of research paradigms. The last of those two are increasingly complex and increasingly varied. Maintenance work is really vital to ensuring that Psychtoolbox maintains reliability and precision, and that all functionality is working correctly. Covering these maintenance costs is becoming increasingly impossible. Our current operating costs are really low, only 5,500 euros a month, and that's because Mario is the only paid contributor at an unsustainably low salary. We also have no costs for offices, lab space, and try and keep equipment costs to the minimum, which is not ideal for a toolbox like Psychtoolbox. Even at that level, our costs have exceeded income since 2021, draining financial reserves. We had hoped that the paid support membership scheme would be a way for labs using Psychtoolbox to be able to contribute a small amount of money that could be easily put into things like grants, and that this would provide a chunk of income that would be able to cover these maintenance costs. Unfortunately, there's been insufficient uptake. If you see on the pie chart on the right, this shows that of all the labs using Psychtoolbox in research, there's only a small number that are actually contributing with a support membership. But we want to say thank you to those few labs that have been supporting us. We really appreciate it. Unfortunately, this funding model, though, seems to not be sufficient to cover maintenance costs. We also have a business partner program, which works in some use cases, but it typically funds specific integration of hardware of that given partner vendor, or its maintenance only. And another source of income in the past years has been contract work for new features, but this has the caveat of only funding a small subset of new features and not funding maintenance. And it tends to be very unsteady and unpredictable income. There's complex requirements with admin, financial aspects for universities. And typically it's only funding highly complex features that are difficult to know how long they will specifically take, and the project budget is often fixed, resulting in a relatively low profit. Because of these problems, we are looking into future funding changes. It seems that the support membership model is not enough to cover costs, so we plan to move to a licensing model where users will need to pay for a license to use our compiled Psychtoolbox MEX files on sub-operating systems. This financial contribution from the Psychtoolbox community is the only way that we are going to be able to continue Psychtoolbox development in the future. There are still other ways to support us as well. You can buy a Psychtoolbox support membership for your lab. That's currently €200 plus tax. Businesses can join our partner program for integration and maintenance of integration of their specific hardware with Psychtoolbox. And you can contract us for new feature development, and that can range from smaller features to much larger ones. Finally, one more thing. Coming soon is Psychtoolbox on Apple Silicon Macs. This is something that's been very in demand on the forum, and there's a lot of changes required due to the new Apple Silicon hardware. These are M1, M2, and so on Macs and related macOS changes. This requires a whole new set of MEX files and libraries and various modifications. And the biggest challenge is that Apple's proprietary graphics chip broke all of the visual timing and timestamping mechanisms that had been developed for Psychtoolbox over the past many years. So a completely different approach was required. After over 330 hours of work, we have a working prototype for this, which will be available soon for paying members after the new licensing model is in place. So stay tuned for that. Finally, I would like to thank you for listening. You can visit psychtoolbox.net if you would like to buy a Psychtoolbox support membership for your lab. You can also follow us on social media or on X and Mastodon. And if you have feedback and questions, you can go to the community forum, psychtoolboxdiscourse.group.